I'm thankful that He did not choose to leave us where we wanted to stay, where we went to, apart from Him. We separated ourselves from Him and decided we could do it ourselves, and we wanted what we wanted. And I'm so thankful that God just didn't say, okay. But He has done everything to redeem us back to Himself, to awaken us, to call us, to help us to realize not only what we are, but who He is. We get so caught up in what we are that we forget so much of the time who He is and what He's about. Jacob is one of those guys, the heel grabber. Being a twin, he holding on to his brother's heel when they're being born. He wanting to be preeminent already from the womb. Listen, from the womb, we are out for our own advantage. And we live lives based on what does it mean for me? What's in it for me? And God comes along and taps us on the shoulder and sometimes slaps us on the back of the head and tries to get us to understand that it is actually about Him. That He is the key, He is the answer, He is the breath and the life, He is the all in all, if we will let Him be. I have taught a 17-year-old girl how to drive called my wife. That was a harrowing experience. I made it as difficult for her as I could. I bought a 3-speed on the floor V8 Mustang. And then I said, come on, let me teach you. Have you ever been in a 3-speed on the floor V8 Mustang with someone who doesn't know how to drive and they get it about halfway in gear and then you start doing this? If you're an automatic drive person, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but you can get a car just rocking and rolling in between trying to start and stop. Because it's interesting, I'll go one step further. She tried to run over the guy who was going to give her driving test. That same problem. Car's in gear, he starts in front of it. At that moment in time, with the car in gear and no brake and no clutch or foot on the clutch, she decided to turn the key, and that car went like it was going to eat the driver. Amazingly, it worked out because he didn't want her to come back. He passed her. I think it was a capitulation. He just kind of said, you win, I'm done, here's your license. I have taught my children how to drive. I'm teaching grandkids, and I'll tell you, at this late stage of my life, to put a teenager, 15-year-old teenager in the driver's seat and you sit on the other side of that vehicle and just turn loose and just say, okay, let's go, let's have fun. And you're sitting over there, your teeth are gritted, and you've got the door, and you're hunting that brake with everything in you. Where's that brake at? Trying to fight yourself from grabbing the stick. You get what I'm talking about. It is so hard to turn loose and let God rule and reign in my life, in your life. But God will settle for no less. In Jacob's life, he's going to go through a process here now. About beginning in chapter, we're going to be in chapter 32, by the way, and back in about chapter 27, you see Jacob coming on the scene and all this taking place in his life, and him being born, holding his brother's heel, and then stealing his brother's birthright, and having to flee and going to Bethel and encountering God there, and that beautiful scene of the angels ascending and descending, and God speaking, and Jacob having a real encounter with God. But then Jacob is still in control. He still has the steering wheel of his life, and he heads off down the highway, and we see him for the next almost 2 decades being who he was, Jacob, the deceiver, the supplanter, the heel catcher. and still trying to make some kind of deal with God. We're good at making deals with God, aren't we? God, I've got this problem, and if you will just cure this, I promise you this. We're always ready to make a covenant with God at any given moment based on what's going on in my life or your life. God, if you will heal this, and I guarantee you I'm going to say this, and I'm going to tell the world about you. Isn't it funny how easily we forget that? How quickly we forget the deals we make with God, and then we say, well, you know, God knows how I am and who I am, and He probably not going to hold me to that. I'm just going to go. That was the kind of guy that Jacob was. But that was the kind of guy that God was willing to come alongside of and not leave him being that kind of guy. And by the time you get to chapter 31 and verse 3, after he's fled from his brother, after he has gone and found Laban, who becomes his father-in-law and marries his two daughters, and that was an ordeal. And Jacob was always in his life until this point, and will even continue on to some degree, struggling with those around him, trying to be preeminent, trying to gain the advantage, trying to understand that, or at least think that this is really about me, and I'm the main person in this story. And God's coming to Jacob afresh in the midst of that, and the success that he has experienced. And he has experienced success. He will say, even in chapter 32, in his prayer, he will say, as he's at this Jabbok River, he says, God, I remember I crossed this river with just a staff in my hand. In other words, I crossed this with nothing, on the run. And here I am today, and I have all these herds and flocks and family and friends and servants and slaves and success. And God has blessed him in that. And most of the time, our problem is that that's where we're back to God being our app. We think, well, life is hard and tough, and I should be blessed, and I need to be taken care of, and this is all about me. And we fall into that category of thinking that this is what life really is supposed to be about. I'm supposed to succeed. I'm supposed to be blessed. I'm supposed to be pampered and petted and prepared for and provided for. And who doesn't want that? But Jacob, through Jacob's life, God is reminding us that God refuses to be. God is up to something in my life and in your life. He's trying to instill himself, fill us with himself. He's trying to instill character. He's trying to instill virtue. He's trying to instill faith. He's trying to instill love. He's trying to instill all these things in us. And it's not just for mine and your benefit, or so that he can have a fresh trophy that he can pat on the back. Because you see, this life that you've been given, it means something. It amounts to something. And it goes far beyond who I am or who you are. I talk about my wife, and I talk about my kids, and I talk about my grandkids. And it reminds me, and it reminds you, as you talk about those same things, that our lives make a huge difference in other people's lives. How we respond to other people. How we handle things that come our way. How people see us in our faith. How are we engaging God? How are we reacting to life's circumstances? How are we letting God be God in us? How does this supposed to look in mine and your life? And God is at work through circumstances, good and bad, to get our attention, to awaken us, to continually, to remind us constantly of who He is and what He is about, And that's what growing in Christ is. It's becoming less of us and more of Him. That's what God is up to in our lives. And He responds to each of us in different ways, according to where we are on that scale of coming to a realization that God is God and we're not. Copernicus called and we found out that we were not the center of the universe. It is God. So what does He do in that process? What does He do in Jacob's life? Well, first of all, He brings him to a place of desperation in verse 7 of 32, chapter 32. Now remember that in 31:3, God has said, Jacob, Jacob, in the midst of his circumstances, in the midst of all the stuff that he's accumulated to Jacob, I want you to do something. I want you to go back home, Jacob. I want you to go back to Bethel. I want you to go back to where you first met me. I've got something I want to show you there. And of course, all that comes with that. Eddie's talking about going back this morning. It is not a bad thing to go back and rethink and reminisce where we've come from, what we were. What has God brought us to? What's He done in my life, in your life? What's He doing in our lives? And so He whispers in Jacob's ear, Jacob, I want you to go back. I've got something. I want to teach you something, Jacob. I want to grow you in your faith. And so Jacob becomes this desperate man. He listens to God, but he goes back to a place that he was running from before. Verse 7, so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people that were with him. And in essence, he sends word to Esau, his brother, I'm here, I want to make amends. And he gets the word back, okay, Esau has got the message, and Esau's coming, and he's bringing 400 men with him. And Jacob is afraid. He is greatly distressed. He doesn't know what that means. What's going to happen now? Life is on shaky ground. God, you told me to come here, and now you put me on this shaky ground. We should never be surprised when God places us on shaky ground, because that's a place where we can decide to trust ourselves or trust God and win that battle. And so he is a desperate man. He is afraid. He said, okay, I followed you, and here we are, and now the unknown is upon me. I don't know what to do about this. I just know that I had to flee before. I know that Esau was ready to kill me before, and now Esau's coming, and he's got back up 400 men with him. This could be the end of me. It could be my demise, the end of my life. And Jacob is a desperate man. God's not afraid to put you. We're afraid to go there, but God's not afraid to put us there. Because it's in those desperate times that we look up. It's in those times that we evaluate our own life and we come to the end of ourselves. And it is a good thing when you look at yourself and you say, God, I am weak, but you are strong. God, I have no recourse. I don't know what's going to happen here. But God, I know you. God, I'm going to trust you. God, I'm going to follow you in the midst of this. Desperation does not have to be a bad place. Some of you experience desperation in your life and you come out the other side. This has been a desperate time for Derek and his family. We have heard it, we have seen it, and we understand it. But they are coming out of it. And they will remember it. And God will continue to use it in their lives, because they will not just remember the desperate time, they will remember the big God who stepped up to the plate and took the journey with them. He was a desperate man. But God wanted him to be not only a desperate man, God wanted him to be a defeated man. Jacob is now left alone. In verses 22 through 25, we see that. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of the Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. So Jacob is alone. Everything that's valuable, everything that he was possessed, he has sent it over the river. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, this man, capital M, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with God. Strange story to us, isn't it? But it is a poignant story. It is a powerful story of how God, in some sense, will humble himself and come to a man. When we think of Jacob, we think of the patriarch. We think of the great Jacob. We think of the end of the story, the end of his life, and all that was accomplished through his life. But Jacob is the deceiver, supplanter, heel catcher. It's all about me guy that God humbled himself and came to. If you don't remember anything else I say to you this morning, I want you to remember this. That you are valuable to God. He has humbled himself, the Bible tells us, and become as a man who wrestles with us. And our part of that is to accept defeat. God did not come to make me better. He has not come to make you better. Or to term an old Dylan phrase, He's not come to make us gooder. He has come to see us perish. He has come to see us die. But I am crucified with Christ. There is death in this thing that is a requirement. For Christ to live, I must die. For Him to be preeminent, I must give up my heart, my life, my will, my direction, as Jacob has done here in this defeated man. He has relinquished control of all of it. We would look at that and say, Jacob's on the wrong side of the river. The valuable stuff is on the other side of the river. Is it really? Of course it has value. I mean, we were talking about wife and children and all those other things. But value is where God is. God's on this side of the river. God's in the place where Jacob really doesn't want to be, of relinquishing himself. God must conquer us to use us. God must kill us to be preeminent in our life. And I know we don't like that terminology, but it is needed and necessary, I believe, that we fully understand that there is death in this thing for us. Death to ourselves, death to this old nature. And it's in this point that God meets us right where He finds us in order to lift us to where He wants us to be. God had promised to bless Jacob, and He has blessed Jacob. He's now a very wealthy man, but we seem to be satisfied with that goal in our lives. If I'm just full and fit and fabulous, then that's what this is. Isn't that where we're headed? Isn't that what this is about? Aren't you supposed to do that in my life? And God wrestles with us and says, no, it's actually a matter about godly character and spiritual influence. It's more about who He is than who we are. Jacob discovered that he spent his life fighting and resisting God's will. Sure, God, even in that, God is still blessed us. Are we not still blessed? Do we wonder that when we look at our own lives, when we evaluate ourselves and we see how far we have fallen, we see how far we have left our first love behind us, we see that we have become selfish, And yet we say, but God still seems to be blessing my life. And He does. But there's more to it than what we can hold in our hands. There's more to it than what we can gain and put in a can. We are fully blessed when we have wrestled with God and we have lost. Because then we gain. We have that paradox in the Scriptures. He who would lose his life will gain it. That's the principle that God works on. So Jacob has become this defeated man. He resisted greatly. I told you last week, and I won't go into it anymore, and I just know that I resisted greatly. I just wasn't sure if, number one, did this God really know? Is He really aware of who I am? Does He really care who I am? Does He really have time to deal with me? Are His promises really for me, or are they for somebody else? It's got to be for that other guy. It's got to be for that guy who really loves Him, who really follows Him, who really sacrifices me. It's got to be more than I am if God wants to be involved in my life. And we go about life thinking about little old me and poor little old me and pitiful little old me. And all the time, this tremendous, big God stands there like a father with his eyes full of love and hope and determination, and saying, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. It's only when we are defeated, when we submit and surrender ourselves to God, that we see God begin to show up really in our lives. And we begin to evaluate this thing not by what I hold in my hand, but who I have in my heart. Elvis Presley had a lot, thank you very much. Elvis Presley had a lot in his hands when he died. What did it matter? It's who we hold in our heart. It's the intangible things. As Paul reminds us, the outward man is fading, wearing, disappearing away, but the inward man is being renewed day by day, the spiritual man. We get so caught up in the physical that we reject the spiritual aspect of our lives. Jacob was a defeated man, and it's in that God can fully begin to use and work. And it's in that we fully begin to understand who God is, and we begin to respond to God and engage God. And what's really important floats to the surface of our lives. And then, as we close this morning, let me just say that Jacob became a defined man. Interesting here in verse 26 and 28. And Jacob said, let me go, for the day breaks. And he said, the man said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, Jacob, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to Jacob, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. In losing, he won. And the Old Testament one's name is linked to his nature. As you well know, Jacob's name, supplanter, deceiver. You imagine Jacob going through life, and every time he meets somebody, by the way, what's your name? Deceiver. Oh, good. Come on over to the house, man. Let me introduce you to my wife and children. Let me hire you. Yeah, I'm looking for that guy, deceiver. Very descriptive of who he was. And we remember the Lord didn't ask the question to get information, but God knows, because he certainly knew Jacob's name. And he certainly knew Jacob's reputation of being a schemer and deceiver. It simply meant, are you going to continue, when he asked Jacob that, are you going to continue living up to your name, deceiving yourself and others? Or will you admit what you are and who you are and let me change you? Receiving in the Bible, receiving a new name signifies a new beginning, and it was Jacob's opportunity to make a fresh start in life. Do you need a fresh start in life this morning? Now, you may go home and you find the same circumstances. And that dark night of the soul maybe that you're going through will turn out to be for your good and for God's glory. And in the midst of that dark night of the soul, in the midst of your current circumstances, whatever they may be, there's something that happens in your life that will strengthen you and empower you and process you through what you're experiencing now. Before we can begin to be like Christ, we have to face ourselves. We have to admit what we are. Jacob's pattern of life is getting ready to be radically changed. The heel catcher is being caught, and he has to confess his true nature before he can be blessed. God comes to us and he says, Keith, who are you? Who are you pretending to be? Who do people think you are? And it's so easy that we put on these facades and we put on these excuses and we put on these fake replies. I'm good. I'm great. Things are wonderful. I'm with it. I'm in it. I'm for it. After his crippling touch, Jacob's struggle took a new direction. Now he's now crippled in his natural strength. He became bold in his faith. It was a day of a new dawning for Jacob as he becomes Israel. He had a new name. He had a new walk. He was limping, but it reminds him of what's taking place. And he had a new relationship with God that would help him face and solve any problem if only he would exercise faith. That's where God is trying to bring us to this morning. That place of just having faith in Him. God wrestles for our souls. And we need to understand that that is good news. It's not easy, but it is good. It's no different with us when we're confronted with the love of God. We can either run or submit to being remade. God puts us in a difficult circumstance, and you have two options. Run to Him or run from Him. And quite often we run from Him because we don't believe in Him enough that He loves us or cares for us or can handle us any situation we find ourselves. So how are you doing this morning? How's your wrestling match with God? Are you prevailing or is God winning? Maybe it's time to let God be sovereign over all of our lives. A story about a man who has misspent most of his life, and a friend was teasing him about that. He said, John, you still spending a lot of time wrestling with the old devil? And John just looked at him and said, no, nowadays I spend most of my time wrestling with God. And his friend said, wrestling with God? How do you hope to win a wrestling match with God? And John smiled and answered, oh, you misunderstand. In this wrestling match, I'm hoping to lose. By losing, we win. By trusting, we gain. By believing, we have renewed strength and hope and help, and the very presence of God Himself at work in mine and your life. What are you wrestling with this morning? Is it your faith? Is it somebody else? Is it some circumstance that's completely out of control in your life? Somebody else's life? I'm letting you think about it. Or are you going to take that and just go out the door this morning and just say, but I can handle it. I always have, I always will. I can do somehow or another. God doesn't want you to just get through it. He wants to take that, whatever that is, whatever your wrestling match this morning is. And He wants to use that in your life to bring you to a place of desperation and defeated and, might I add, developed. He's trying to develop us through these things. And how sad it will be if we do not take the journey with Him instead of taking it by ourselves. Instead of discounting God and putting Him off in a corner someplace and just, it's no use, no hope, no help. I can do it. God's got a better plan. He's got a better idea. He's got a better way. And even in the midst of that struggle, the amazing thing is that somehow or another the peace of God that passes understanding is yours through Jesus Christ our Lord. No matter what it is. Father, we thank you that you love us. You continue to whisper that in our ear, and not only that, but shout it from the mountaintops as we see your grace and mercy. We see your abundance, your provision, your blessing. We are surrounded by those things. We are surrounded by your heart and your life. And all you desire to do is permeate our lives, to completely invade us to the point that we become lost in you. You know how difficult this world is. You came and you have experienced everything we experienced. And in that, you come alongside of us. And you give us exactly what we need. You give us strength to carry on. You give us hope for tomorrow. You give us eternal life. And you give us abundant life right now. And that abundant life is just knowing and trusting and living in and through Christ. Help us to give up this morning whatever it is we need to give up. And call out and cry out to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Would you just, as you're just continuing to sit there, would you just continue to, in an attitude of prayer this morning, and you're talking to God right now. You're not worried about the person next door to you right now. You're just talking to God. God knows. You might as well just confess it. He knows. And just be open and honest with me. God, here I am. You know what's going on in my life. You know the struggle. You know the mess. You know what's happening. You know what's needed. And you're calling out to God this way. Surrendering all to Him. Some of you have prayed and you have sought the Lord this morning, and you may need to talk to somebody about that. We'll be available. We're still here. This invitation continues on into the week and the months and the years ahead. It's never too late to respond to God, to seek Him, to talk to somebody. And we make that available to you this morning. We're getting ready to depart. We're going to say the departing prayer. I pray that you'll go in Jesus' name, that you'll go in a prayerful attitude, that you'll take this and you'll remember this, that that God is intersecting mine and your life, and He has so much desire for you, right where you are, to take you to where He wants you to be. Father, we love you. Help us to love you more. Help us to see you more, to respond to you, and not just the circumstances, the things of this world. Give peace, give hope, give help, give assurance. Increase our faith, that we may be your people, that we may be your influence to those around us, is our prayer. In Jesus' name. God bless you. God bless you. See you soon.